Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, listen to you. You sound not that you weren't sounding good on the last episode, but it sounds like you're feeling better now
Yes,
compared to our last one.
yes, thank you. I am definitely both feeling better and sounding better. It was funny going back and re-listening to the episode when I was putting the list together, especially at the beginning. I'm like so careful about my voice and just sounding so like, "Hi, I'm Caroline," to kind of keep it under control. But I am feeling much better and grateful for all the rest and fluids and everything I've had since.
Nice. Well, today's episode, I'm really looking forward to. Like, I have a feeling it's going to be kind of almost like a supersize episode because I was going through my notes last night and like there's a lot to unpack here today. And
Yes.
of course, today we are talking all about the 50th anniversary of one of the most celebrated, if not the most celebrated movie of all time, and that's The Godfather. You know, we thought there was a re-release in theaters of the movie just last month. There's a new TV series coming out on Paramount Plus called The Offer, which looks at the making of the film. And we thought it would be a perfect time to chat all things about The Godfather today. And joining us, I don't want to be putting too much pressure on our guest today because I almost kind of want to say like our guest is almost like the Godfather expert of Overdue Finds in a way, because she's been on the show obviously quite a few times. And of course, we're talking about Overdue Finds family member Camilla Fita. Camilla, welcome back to the show. You know, I sent you the invite because it's funny because like we came up with this episode idea kind of last minute. And I was like, oh, we need to have Camilla on because she's talked about The Godfather a few times. So have I put too much pressure on you now as being the Overdue Finds Godfather expert?
I don't think so. I hope not. Just I'm trying to think. Yeah, we talked about it because I had read the book, "Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli." Yeah, I'd be comfortable. I think I'm adding to my list. I believe I'm the TikTok expert, the Godfather expert. I'll just pile up those superlatives for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's funny because that book that you just referenced, that of course for that Paramount series I was talking about, The Offer, that's what that show is. That's what that show is based on. So yeah, we're going to talk all things about The Godfather, books, movies, sequels, all of that fun stuff. And before we get into that today, let's go over our recent Overdue Finds picks. Camilla, I know it seems almost like there's like an Overdue Finds curse right now. Caroline was sick. You just told me before we started recording, you're also feeling a little under the weather today. So what have you been enjoying lately or trying to enjoy?
Yeah, so I've been kind of cooped up at home a bit with a non-COVID related illness. So a lot of time to watch or sleep in front of the TV while the like dulcet tones of Murder, She Wrote plays, which has been really, really helpful to my recovery. I've talked with Caroline about our love of Murder, She Wrote. But I have been reading as well. Perfect time to do it. Nothing else to do. But one of the things I absolutely love and is kind of related to, we'll talk about the book. So the book was actually based on a long form article in Vanity Fair. And I absolutely adore long form articles. It can be true crime or it can be anything, the making of, oral histories. If it's a long form article, I'm there. And one of my favorite long form writers is Skip Hollandsworth. Who wrote the, I guess, ultimate long form article, which was a book. And so he writes for Texas Monthly, which is a great online, obviously very Texas focused, but really, really great collection of, like in-depth reporting on different topics, whether it's food or true crime or just life in Texas, and he writes for them. But he put out a book. I, for some reason, thought it had just come out. It's like 5 years old, but I just discovered it. It's called The Midnight Assassin, and it's about what they claim to be could have been America's first serial killer in Texas in the 19th century in Austin, so late 1800s. And it's really great. Obviously, when you're reading like very old true crime, there's not a lot of, I guess, people's memories of what happened. You can't just interview people who were there because everyone's gone. So yeah, you can really tell the great research that went into it, and really setting the scene of this kind of like the emergence, I guess, Austin at the time, now it's a metropolis. At the time it was, sort of on the edge of the frontier. And it's really great. So yeah, check out Skip Hollandsworth, his articles and this book, Midnight Assassin.
Nice. It seems like a lot of today anyway, when you see those long form articles and everything, and it does seem like it's almost like a little bit of a lost art. A lot of times that type of topic, to me, like when you were mentioning that story to me, I'm like, oh wow, that sounds like it'd be like an awesome podcast as well. So that's totally something I could see. Maybe, who knows, maybe they're working on it or somebody has created it already, but that's the first thing that came to my mind anyway. All right, Caroline.
Yes.
Feeling better?
Yeah.
Back on the mend? What have you been enjoying lately?
Well, this one, I'm taking back a little ways for this one because I don't think I've talked about it on the show before. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I was doing some research for this episode and was looking at Vulture recently published a list of the best sequels in movie history. And I was reading through that. You get to the top 10, and there in the top 10 is a little movie called Babe, Pig in the City. And this movie is wild. I watched it for the first time. It came out in 1998, and it is a sequel to the movie Babe, the talking pig who becomes a sheepdog trained pig, and Farmer Hoggett, played by James Cromwell, enters him in the sheepdog trials, and he goes, and it's like, oh no, we can't allow this, and everyone laughs at him and thinks he's crazy, but then Babe, is able to herd the sheep, and he wins, and it's all triumphant, and there's a song, and it's very sad but lovely. Babe Pig in the City came out a couple years later. It is dark. It is a super dark movie, and it really kind of emphasizes like a happy ending depends on where you stop the story, because you've got a triumphant Farmer Hoggett at the end, and then Babe Pig in the City kind of opens up with him like returning home. He's immediately injured. His wife needs to run the farm. They run out of money. The bank tries to foreclose. They sign Babe up in like a circus state fair thing that he's going to be like a show pig, but she has to take it. She is the most naive person in the history of the world. They're in the city for like 2 seconds and all their money's gone. They're in dire straits. They have to stay at this, the animals get separated from her. It's just so dark. The movie, one review I was reading likens it more to Animal Farm and Oliver Twist than the original. And the tone is all over the place. It's written, directed, and produced by George Miller, who also did Mad Max.
Oh my God.
And it is like I'm watching it and just going, what is going on? So I highly recommend checking out Babe Pig in the City if you haven't seen it sometime in the years since it's been released. So yeah, very interesting as a film sequel, and a movie that I haven't stopped thinking about since I watched it in early days of the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's I remember watching that movie shortly after it came out. I think it was on home video at the time. Definitely didn't see it in the theater. And yeah, Cheryl and I watched it, and she was a big fan of the first movie.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what's got, like, I need to go back and rewatch this movie, because I do remember it being like, just thinking at the time, like, this movie's really messed up. Like,
Yeah.
this is so, like you said, it's so, just like the first Babe movie is like one of the sweetest, heartwarming movies you could ever watch. And then the sequel is just, like you said, it's like, I remember, I don't know, was there a scene like where animals were like falling off a truck and yeah, like I just remember stuff like that. So it's,
and like drownings and
oh.
yeah, it's it's quite something. Anyway, EPL, if all of this has enticed you, which I really hope it has, because I want more people to see it. We do not talk enough about Pig in the City in 2022. So if you've seen it, I want to talk about it. EPL has it both on DVD and to stream through Hoopla. So
Nice.
check it out. Okay, Bryce, what have you been enjoying? Baseball pick. Is it a baseball pick?
I do not have a baseball pick this week, surprisingly. If we've talked a lot about Canopy on the show before, we're all big fans here, and if you can, you should definitely subscribe to their newsletter, because like every Friday they send out this email where it's like, you know, movies to watch this weekend. And so last Friday I'm looking at it, and one of the top movies they have listed was the 1998 comedy Dirty Work. Now, what I love about this movie is it's from two comedians who some of the all-time greats that we sadly lost this year, of course, Norm Macdonald and Bob Saget. So yeah, it's available to stream right now on Canopy, and it's my pick this week. So Bob Saget actually directed this movie. As far as I know, I believe this is the only like major motion picture he has actually directed. And it stars Norm Macdonald as a guy named Mitch, who decides to open up a revenge for hire business with his friend Sam, who is played by another comedian, Artie Lang. Basically, Norm Macdonald's character realizes that he needs to get his life together, and he's never really been good at holding down a job, but the only thing he's ever been good at is taking revenge on people, as, you know, a skill most people, you know, don't really have, but Mitch really excels in it. So there's a who's who of comedy, as this movie also has cameos from Chevy Chase, Don Rickles, and Chris Farley. The movie, just a heads up, it's crude, very crude, but it's hilarious. And this is a movie that really got overlooked when it originally came out in the summer of 1998. Just nobody went to see it, but it's kind of found cult status on online now, or sorry, on home video. But yeah, it won't be for everyone, but if you're a fan of Norm Macdonald's comedy, this is one that you're absolutely going to love. So Dirty Work, go check it out on Canopy. All right. So today we are talking all about the 50th anniversary of the release of The Godfather. So as with all of these kind of recap episodes that we do, of course, spoiler alert. This is a 50-year-old movie. Caroline, you said it best during our last episode on The Lion King, where it was kind of like, look, like if you've held off this long to watch the movie, you're probably not going to listen to the podcast first and then go watch the movie. But this is kind of the same thing. So fair warning, well, of course, we'll be talking about the ending and characters being killed and all of that fun stuff. But if that doesn't bother you and you're not as familiar with it, The Godfather follows the story of the Corleone family, who is led by the Godfather himself, Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando. When a rival comes to town and wants the family to get involved in the drug trade, it starts an all-out war, which turns deadly and leads to Vito's son Michael, played by Al Pacino, taking over the family business. The movie is based on the book of the same name from Mario Puzo, which was first published in 1969. So when I was doing these, my research here for these fun facts, Caroline, I came across this little gem. Apparently Paramount Pictures obtained the rights to the novel before it really took off for only $80,000. Now, Hollywood legend has it that Mario Puzo's agent didn't want him to take that offer. Basically was like, you're sitting on a gold mine here. Do not sell this for 80 grand. And rumor has it Mario Puzo really needed the money. So he just took the money, and the kind of like the rest is history. The movie was originally released on March 24th, 1972 to both critical and audience acclaim. It was the highest grossing movie of 1972, and at one point was the highest grossing movie of all time after collecting almost $300 million at the box office. That's like in an Avengers opening weekend now almost.
It's a different world.
It really is, yeah. Yeah, so director Francis Ford Coppola was selected to direct the film since producer Robert Evans insisted that the film be authentic and that could only happen with an Italian director. It helped that Coppola was a relative unknown director at the time and would be cheaper than bigger name directors such as Sergio Leone. Now, what I love too about kind of going back and looking at some of these old movies is some of the names that almost could have been casted or maybe were offered roles. So some big names included for the role of Vito Corleone, Laurence Olivier, and Ernest Borgnine. For Michael Corleone, Warren Beatty, Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, and Jack Nicholson. Apparently, Burt Reynolds was offered the role, but Marlon Brando said he would leave the project if Burt Reynolds was given that role. So Burt Reynolds decided to walk. Robert De Niro, who of course was in Part Two, playing a young Vito Corleone, was originally cast in the movie as Paulie Gatto, who was Don Corleone's driver, but had to drop out when he got a part on Broadway. And at the 45th Academy Awards, the film won Best Picture, Best Actor for Marlon Brando, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola. So honestly, I could just probably talk for an hour just with fun facts about this movie because I went down this huge Godfather rabbit hole, and it's like a treasure trove of Hollywood history. It's quite amazing. So I guess what's everybody's history with the movie? Like, Camilla, do you remember when you first watched it and kind of what your initial thoughts were?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't remember when I first watched it. I know I think even before I saw it, like, I think with all people of our generation, you saw it just lampooned in pop culture, right? Like on The Simpsons, and of course, like The Godfather. I'm not even going to attempt an impression, but, everyone had like a Godfather impression. And I do remember being a child in elementary, and I took piano. And I'll never forget, my piano teacher had like a movie theme recital. So all of her students had got to pick movie themes. And, this was the 90s. So, all of the Disneys were represented and all this stuff. And for some reason, I latched onto the Godfather's theme. And I'd never seen the movie. I was a little bit too young at that point. But I just I can't imagine my mom, she just kept hearing that score over and over, played very badly by me, but I loved it. I loved everything. Weirdly, growing up, I was trying to I'm like, where did that come from? I was weirdly obsessed with the like American Mafia, like the story of the American Mafia, like the real life story of it. And I was trying to think like, where did that come from? I have no Italian background. Like I've, come from a law-abiding family. And I was also obsessed with like Bonnie and Clyde. So just a lot of like lawlessness in my head. But I realized it was from A&E. The channel back in the day when it was actually arts and entertainment, but they had quite a suite of like the history of the mafia, just shows over and over. Like, I don't know if they just got like FBI tapes released and they're like, just run it, make a show. But I could, and yeah, I don't know. I just was like obsessed, like with all of them. Like I still can list all these like names of like mafia dons like throughout the 20th century. Like, I don't know why, but that's, I guess, where it all stemmed from. And then finally, when I was like, I reached a bit of an older age, I think I was in junior high, and I borrowed a friend of mine. She had the three Godfathers in VHS, and I believe they were each two I was going to say discs. They were not discs.
No.
2 tapes each. So it was this huge box. I don't think I ever gave it back. I borrowed it, and I don't think I still have it. And yeah, and that was when I first watched The Godfather. But I had all this like weird background knowledge, so I felt like I was ready.
Caroline, how about you? Like, do you remember when you first saw it? Yeah, and like kind of what your reaction was to it?
Yeah, mine is, I think, something that I've kind of self mythized around my love of film. I've talked about it before, but it's tied to the American Film Institute's 100 Greatest Movies, which came out, the list I think came out in 1997. But growing up, I have a very vivid memory of the VHS tapes in our house. And there were the ones that I was interested in, which, going back to the last episode, involved a lot of those Disney clamshells. There were some scholastic story type ones that you could get out of like a book order or something like that. So we had all of our like kids DVDs, right? Like they weren't kids VHS. It's so easy not to say that. But kids VHS that were kind of like the bulk of the collection in our house. But then there are the ones that were my dad's, and these were like the adult ones, not sexy adult ones, but like there was Oliver Twist, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and The Godfather in this box set. And so I remember seeing it, the image of the like the marionette strings on there on the box on the outside. And so it was just kind of like this presence there, that I knew and knew kind of wasn't really for me because it was on that side of the collection, and was happy enough with my Disney stuff. Then I started watching some of the AFI Top 100 movies, and I remember one weekend, I think it was a random Saturday, my dad said, "Let's watch the Godfather movies today." So that became the Godfather day where we sat down and watched it. And I remember him saying, as the movie started, like it was basically like, get ready, you're gonna be humming this music for the rest of your life. And like you, Camila, I had already been definitely exposed to it primarily through The Simpsons, but then other just general cultural stuff. But it was definitely, I think, I've kind of built it up in my head as this like very important film moment in my film journey of watching it. So then after that, I remember getting the so I think we put it on, and I was trying to remember if this was with the VHS or when I got the DVDs, because I got that when the Godfather DVD set came out. That was a big deal. And I remember I think I got that for Christmas that year. I think it must have been the VHS where we put the second tape in first, and I would have thought they would have been more clearly labeled, but the second tape picks up right after Sonny's been killed. And like there's this shot of like Cam in the car and you're watching, and then it like goes, and I'm like, we watched it for a little while, and I was just like, well, it really just drops you in on the action here. And then I was like, wait, I don't think this is right. So then we went back and watched it in the correct order. And I thought that might have been the DVD, because do people still need to flip over DVDs too? Even that
No.
feels really old.
Yeah, like it's funny because I have the DVD collection. That's what I watched in prep for this movie. Like
Yeah.
for the first Godfather, it's only on 1 disc. Godfather 2 is on 2 discs. But I have a copy in my collection of Gangs of New York, the Martin Scorsese movie. And that's one where you do have to flip it partway through the movie. It just seems silly now.
Yeah, and like the idea of having like multiple VHSs to put on. So that's the experience that I remember of watching it for the first time. Definitely didn't take it all in, all the details. Even now when I was rewatching, I get a little there's a lot of characters and they're throwing a lot of names at you. So took a couple rewatchings for me to be like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. But that was my introduction to The Godfather. So I was already coming into it as this, knowing it had this kind of stature in culture, in movies. So yeah, that's my perspective. Bryce, tell us about your first experience with The Godfather.
Yeah, so I've always been like in general, just even as far back as I can remember as a kid, just been obsessed with pop culture. And I remember as a teenager, probably being about the age of 13 or 14 is when I really started to like read into like the making of movies and just get really into obviously I was aware and definitely loved like all the current movies coming out, but I wanted to learn more about some of like the older movies. And I remember reading this article about how at the time, this was written in the 90s, that the 1970s were like the greatest decade for movies. So I kind of made it my mission to go back and like watch so many of these movies that they had been talking about in this article, stuff like Apocalypse Now, and of course the Godfather movies. So yeah, I think I first saw The Godfather when I was probably about 13 or 14, and I was just absolutely blown away by it, and like very similar to you, Camilla. So like I was aware with like a lot of the Mafia documentaries and stuff on A&E, and just like stuff like The Untouchables I was a big fan of, which I know is very fictionalized telling of the story of Al Capone, but I just became like absolutely obsessed with it. And I think like the next weekend I remember going to rent Part Two. After that, it was like Part Three, where, we'll talk about Part Three a little bit later on. But I just knew I was watching something special. And like you said too, even the music in the wedding scene near the beginning, just like the big band is playing it and everything. Like, I haven't watched The Godfather in years before, just the other night. And that music, like, I just knew it was coming up. Like, it was like ingrained in my head and everything. So, I absolutely loved it. And, to this day, it's one of my personal favorite movies.
So we all had that experience kind of watching the movie. There wouldn't have been a movie if it wasn't for the book, as you say, Bryce, published a few years before the movie came out and snapped up right away. Have you read The Godfather by Mario Puzo? And if so, when did that figure in? Camila?
No, I haven't. We talked sort of about the, Bryce, you did like some background about the movie, and we've already mentioned it, but I'll mention it again because there is so much about The Godfather. But the book, Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli by Mark Seal, was actually based on a long form article that he wrote in Vanity Fair. And he talks a bit about it, but in the book, so you can obviously read both, you can read either. The book really goes into detail about how the creation of the book and Mario Puzo and his life, and he was this kind of like this sad sack guy, like always sort of at the end of his tether. Talked about his upbringing in New York and then his big family, like, he got married and had kids and always wanted to be a writer and just was plugging away at it and just was like failing spectacularly. And I think this was like a Hail Mary shot. He kind of presented this. The book wasn't even finished. I think it had a different title at the time when he offered it. And he needed it because he was like a huge gambler, and he needed the money and sold it. And then, and it just hit big. So, but I never read the book. I never read The Godfather. What I did read, I don't know why, was a later book by him in the 90s called The Last Dawn.
It's because it was a huge phenomenon. It is very clear in my mind that Mario Puzo's The Last Dawn book and then immediate miniseries was a thing.
So for The Last Dawn, yeah, it's funny because that's the title of that kind of like, I don't know, it was like in my mind and then out of it. Like I just haven't thought about that book in like years. Did that have to do with the Corleone family, or is this like a different family altogether? It's not connected at all.
It's a different
Hmm.
story, I believe. Bryce, on the last episode, you mentioned that you were then currently reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an update for us?
Yeah, so I still am not finished the book. I'm partway through it. But like from what I've read so far, and especially watching the movie the other night, it's so a couple of things with the book. So far, it seems like it is very faithful to the movie anyway, from what I've read. Just like the beginning and everything, like of course it takes place at the book really opens up with the wedding and Michael's coming home and Vito kind of course, like he can't refuse a request on the day of his daughter's wedding and all of that stuff, and everybody coming in to pay respects to him and ask for favors. So that stuff's all good. Now well, the one thing I did find funny about it, and in my research here, I guess one of the things I read was Francis Ford Coppola had concerns about doing the film adaptation because he felt the book was sleazy and sensationalist. And there's a part where near the beginning of the book where they devote a lot of time on the size of a certain body part of Sonny's. And it was just like, it just goes on for quite a while. Like it's unnecessarily graphic and just like it. Yeah. I mean, I won't say too much because, yeah, you should maybe go read it, but it is pretty sleazy book actually. So I'm sure there's some more sleaze coming up that I'll get to read into it. But, Caroline, have you read the whole book?
Yeah, if not in a long, long time. But it's been my go-to when people are like, "Well, name a book that or name a movie that's better than the book." It's been my go-to for that because I think it really almost like chisels out the way that like is it Michelangelo describing like marble sculptures as you just take away the unnecessary parts and then you're left with the piece of art underneath. I think that the movie synthesizes a lot. Like it can achieve in one silent scene what pages and pages and pages of talking about Sonny can takes in the book.
So there are so many iconic scenes in this movie. Camilla, do you have a favorite character and scene?
I think this is going to sound a bit. I do like Sonny, and I do like when he beats up his sister's husband.
Yeah, Carlo. Yeah.
I just that kind of like that family loyalty, and yeah, and I love James Caan. I think he's just such a like. It's going to be like a dynamo on screen. Like he just kind of like pops off.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
yeah, and just that kind of that energy, you really see it, and you're just propelled along with it. That's another thing. There's that energy to this movie, like in certain scenes, and I think, yeah, like one of the things when I rewatched it, I think I mentioned in a previous episode that it's a Christmas movie for me, but it's
Yeah.
just one of the movies that I put on when I'm putting up Christmas decorations because it's nice and long, and yeah, you can have it on in the background. They're almost like vignettes. To me, like I'm always struck by just how you're almost like, when you're at a like an art museum and you're just like going from painting to painting, that kind of feels like The Godfather. Like you're in New York, then the like hospital, then that restaurant scene, you're just like kind of floating along, but there is that energy. And then of course you're in Italy and you take this detour, and yeah, but for sure, Sonny and James Caan and just that explosiveness of him going after his brother-in-law is really top for me.
That beat down in the streets is one of my all-time favorite movie scenes just in general, and it's so funny with like the garbage can lid and he's just like hitting him with it. But the other part too that's really funny, and it's like a well-known goof, is like where he's got him pinned up against the wall and he goes to like punch him with his left, and you probably should have done the right, because like you clearly see that he does not make contact with him at all. But of course, like the sound, you hear him like hitting him and everything. But I mean, the scene is so well done, it doesn't really like take away from it at all.
Well, and there's something about Sonny as a character who makes you kind of believe that like he could just hit the air and still find a way to injure some
Oh
other
yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely an intense, very intense character for sure. And yeah, just the way he explains stuff, he does like he does a lot of like talking with his hands and everything. And one thing, another trivia bit I read about the movie was, so at the scene at the beginning when it's the wedding, and he comes across the photographer outside and he grabs his camera and throws it down. He wasn't supposed to do that. Like he was just supposed to kind of like push the guy out of the way, but James Caan decided he like grabbed the camera, threw it to the ground, smashes it, and then just takes some money out of his pocket and just like throws it on the ground. Like that wasn't in the script. It was so perfect to see, him do that. It was, yeah, it makes that scene even better knowing that it wasn't scripted. Caroline, do you have is Sonny your favorite character as well, or did you have any other scenes that really stood out to you?
There are so many. Like this is like just characters in there. I started writing and like each character kind of gets a moment, at least one and I don't know that I had realized that. Camilla, I love what you said about the way that the film progresses and thinking of it like almost like paintings as well. The cinematography in this.
Mm-hmm.
We could have a whole other episode on that. But there are so many scenes that like for all that it's a motion picture, there's stillness. And like the scenes of like the one that I mentioned before of like the car after Sonny gets shot, and there's just like this stillness to it. There are a lot of establishing shots. Just there's a lot even in the way that things are set up and framed that look like paintings. And that was just something I noticed kind of going through the whole movie. I like Tom Hagen. I think in this the one line it's not even a funny line, but kind of is when he goes out to Hollywood and the director that he's trying to get the
Almost
Fontaine
Johnny
the
Fontaine.
Johnny Fontaine into the movie, so he's talking
Yeah.
to the director or the producer, and uh, he's just spouting all of these like anti-Italian epithets about this, and Tom Hagen's like, "Well, I'm German Irish," and like just the way that he says that, and then the director does not miss a beat in coming back. Like it is a funny scene, and just the dynamics between particularly the children of the Corleone family, the way that the brothers interact, the moments of with Connie as well, the whole wedding. I mean, I checked. It's like it's basically the first 25 minutes of the movie are just set at the wedding, and it's such a perfect way to drop into this world. And it's one of my favorite things, which is when you have like well-defined characters and you just kind of wind them up and let them interact with each other. And it's a little like strong the way that like Kay Adams is an audience stand-in as well, of like literally going like, who's that guy, who's that over there, what's the deal with this?
Yeah.
And but it's an effective way of getting some of that exposition across in it, and it's just enjoyable. To me, in my head, Mo Green has a bigger role
Oh,
because like he's
yeah.
just there for like a scene and a half, if really. But like the I'm Mo Green, I think about that line all the time, and just the way that he delivers it, Alex Rocco is like so good. And that scene, it's such an important scene with Fredo and him as well. Like we'll get into talking about Godfather Part Two, but that kind of reverse informs how I feel about Freddie in this movie. Just it, like when you think about it, you mentioned Marlon Brando won the Oscar for his role. He won lead actor, refused, did not accept that award. But 3 actors were nominated for Best Supporting Actor, with Al Pacino and James Caan and Robert Duvall. And like, there are just so many great performances in this. Like, we haven't even talked about Marlon Brando.
No. Yeah, it's funny. Sorry, you mentioned Mo Green, and for whatever reason, I thought he had a much bigger role in this movie. And you're right. It's like he's only on screen for like, if it's not even 5 minutes tops, but he's such like, yeah, that line, I'm Mo Green. Like that's something like, there's just an iconic movie line. And yeah, when I was rewatching it, I was just like, oh man, I really wish we had more Mo Green. But it's funny because I was looking online and it was like, is Mo Green based on anybody? And it was reported that he was kind of loosely based on Bugsy Siegel, essentially, was the rumor there. But yeah, for me, definitely Sonny was for sure my favorite character. But another character that I loved, and you just touched on him, was poor Fredo. And rewatching this again, and just like the scene where Vito was shot in the back. Poor Fredo, of course, he's there and he like fumbles his gun, and which you feel bad for him, but at the same time it's kind of funny. just the way he fumbles it. Like if you go back and watch that scene, it's hard not to laugh. But Fredo's doing his best. And like, I also love the scene too, where Vito comes home from the hospital and everybody's like at his bedside, grandkids are coming by to kiss him and, all that stuff. And they're giving him an update on everything. And they're like, yeah, Fredo's been down in Vegas and he's learning so much. And he's just kind of very sheepishly like, yeah, I'm learning the casinos. Like it's just, head down, aw shucks me and everything. So yeah, Fredo, it's hard not to love Fredo. But honestly, like I think my favorite scene in the whole movie is the restaurant scene where Michael kills Salazzo and Sergeant McCluskey. Like you said, just the description leading up to it, where they're like, talking about where they're going to hide the gun and what you do with the gun afterwards. And it's funny because like, I've watched my fair share of like violent movies over the years, but when you go back and you watch that scene, it's just the way that like when Michael shoots both of those characters, and just how like violent and real it seems. Like, not to sound all, gross or anything, but like when he shoots Salazzo and you see this, like, obviously there's blood, but there's just like this mist that comes out, and it just seems, yeah, obviously I've not seen anybody shot in real life, thankfully, but it just seems so real, and it's just very raw and just very, very gritty. And yeah, it's an amazing scene. That's one, Camilla, where like you said, it's, it'll be on TV, and if I know it's coming up to that part, I will stop what I'm doing and absolutely watch the rest of that scene.
We've talked about some of our favorite characters and scenes and story elements of it. The movie could not be contained the story could not be contained in a single movie. There is, of course, The Godfather Part Two, released 2 years later. Some people say that Part Two is the superior film. Where are we landing on that? Camilla, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can definitely understand why people say that, but for me, the first one, just because it just made such a mark on me, the filmmaking, the energy,
James Caan,
like just, yeah, it just stuck with me, that first one. And although obviously the second one is very good, for me personally, it just, yeah, the first one will always take first place for sure.
Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. The second movie is good, but I do find the second movie drags a little bit. Like when they're in Cuba and everything, like it's just, and it's funny because The Godfather is still like a 3-hour movie, but it doesn't feel like it's 3 hours. Like it's like a very tight 3 hours. Like everything that needs to be there is there. And like you said, there's all these like vignettes of like, oh, they're in Sicily, they're in New York, and now Kay and Michael are married, and all this other stuff. So I just find it's just more of an enjoyable movie. And I mean, part two, of course, has a more powerful ending, I would say, definitely with the death of Fredo. But yeah, I've never quite understand those people who are like part two is the superior film. Like it feels more epic, I guess, because then we also have the backstory with Vito Corleone. But yeah, that's my take. Caroline, how do you feel?
I almost feel like I should take the part two just to stir things up a little bit. But no, I'm team part one, and for all of the reasons that you said, I think that it can stand on its own in a way that it's definitely informed. Like when we were talking about Fredo, I think the relationship that we would have with him as a character is much different if it was only in that first movie versus what we know about what comes later. But I mean, the ending of the first one is just so powerful as well, with the way that the door shuts on Kay as she watches people accepting Michael as the new Godfather, and it's just, I think the way that the arc of it is really effectively done. And so yeah, I just have always preferred Godfather 1. I did rewatch it in advance of the podcast. I didn't yet rewatch part 2, but part 1 made me want to watch part 2. So maybe maybe when I come back for the next recording next week, my overdue finds pick might be part 2, and it's like, here's why I was wrong. So Godfather Part 2 is an interesting kind of element in pop culture. Francis Ford Coppola, again, I was reading that he sees it as like a duology, like it's part 1 and part 2, and then an epilogue or a coda, which is not how Paramount ended up marketing it. And so part 3 has this kind of weird relationship to 1 and 2 that was not the vision that Francis Ford Coppola had, I guess, even back when 1 and 2 were being filmed. So yeah, there's part 2, and are we going to talk about part 3? What do we have to say about part
I mean,
3?
we have to talk about part three a little bit. Is it as bad of a movie as people like? I don't think it's a bad movie at all. People, and it's tough because one and two are these, seen as these perfect example of what movies can be and what movies are, and three just isn't. It doesn't have the same impact. It doesn't, like, it just feels, it's just totally different. Of course, the movie came out like nearly 20 years later, but yeah, it's an okay movie, I would say. Like, it's a good movie, but it's just like, it's tough to watch it, and because you do start comparing it to the other two for sure. And like Sofia Coppola, she, God bless her, she's an amazing director, maybe not the greatest actress in the world. If you're making a list though of your favorite movies, where does The Godfather rank for you? And are there other movies about the mafia that you enjoy, Caroline?
My it would depend on what kind of list of favorite movies I'm doing and who I'm sharing it with. I think this is definitely a go-to as a good movie. I like it. I think I've shared on the podcast before. I also like Citizen Kane, so pretty much like I do kind of have some pretty cliche favorite movies in terms of like top movies of all time lists and things like that. I am going to listen, I think, as the two of you talk about your favorite mafia movies. I was looking at a lot of lists of best mafia movies. I've seen Goodfellas, and that's, I think, it really for me. I think it's a combination of like three factors I think one is exactly what you were just saying, Camila, like a little bit of like Godfather fatigue of like when I watched the first one and I'm like, oh, I want to live in this world. Like not me as a character, but I just want to spend time with this movie world.
Mhm.
And then by the time I've finished part two and maybe part three, and I've done my Wikipedia deep dive on everything, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm kind of mafiaed out at the moment. And it's never really spurred me into seeing other things. I think I also, more so than the true crime stuff you guys talked about, what I remember is kind of becoming aware of these movies in the parody era of
Mhm.
like when Robert De Niro and James Caan were like playing parodies of themselves in Analyze This or Mickey Blue Eyes in the 90s. There was, Jane Austen's Mafia was a movie that, came out not actually written by Jane Austen, if I'm pulling the curtain back too far. But it was just, I think that one was a Leslie Nielsen movie. But it was just like, that's kind of what I was aware of, and it didn't really seem to be for me. And also at that point, Mario Puzo was like a franchise name.
Mhm.
Like it became like, as much as he probably could have held out for more money for The Godfather originally, I think he did okay by like with his the way that like I just remember again going back to The Last Dawn, it was a thing and it was like, oh okay, this is a thing right now, and it did never really seemed to be exactly what I was looking for. So probably my favorite mafia movie on a list of like this and Goodfellas, but yeah, I'm curious to hear what other ones you guys have enjoyed.
Go with you, Camila.
Yeah, well, I think like I've never had like a top 10 list. I'm very much like mood based when it comes to movies or like so yeah, Godfather is up there. Definitely, like I said, in the background, like a painting, it really lends itself to any kind of decor setup, Christmas or otherwise, if you're doing that, throw it on in the background. But in terms of other mafia movies, as I've mentioned, the absolutely crazy Bella Mafia is nuts. I don't even know if you can get it anywhere. Yeah, Last Dawn I remember watching. But my heart for sure belongs to Goodfellas. I told Bryce when we discussed having this episode, I was like, you've got to keep me in check because I will just jump onto talking about Goodfellas. Came out the same year as Godfather Part 3. So there is definitely sort of that like continuation handing off to like, but to me, Goodfellas is like Godfather. To me, is kind of like your fancy living room with like the fancy couches and the beautiful paintings, and you just want to sit and admire. Goodfellas for me is like your comfy family room that you can just kind of cozy up in. And oh, I love Goodfellas. 50 years from 1990, pencil me in.
Yeah, me too. Same way. And it's funny because like I go on this website called Flick Chart and I recommend it to all movie lovers because what you can do is they'll put like two random movies up and you pick whether or not you like it more than the other one, or you can say you haven't seen it. And basically it kind of creates like your all-time top movies list. And for the longest time, The Godfather would have sat on top of that list. But I agree. Like my Godfather's number 2 for me. All-time movies, number 1 is Goodfellas for me. And yeah, 50th anniversary. We're down for doing a retrospective episode on that. But yeah, to me, that's like, it's Martin Scorsese's best movie. Joe Pesci's scary in it. It's just, you described it perfectly, Camilla, with like, Godfather is your nice fancy living room. There's no TV in it. It's just a nice painting on the wall. And Goodfellas is grab the popcorn and go sit in the family room and watch this movie. A couple other movies I really like, and also 2 from Martin Scorsese. Casino, I think, gets criminally underlooked when people are sharing their favorite mob movies. I would put it up there with Goodfellas and Godfather myself. And Donnie Brasco with Al Pacino and Johnny Depp is also a great mob movie. It came out, I think, in 97 or 96, and it's set in the 70s. It's a great throwback movie. So yeah, go check those ones out.
I liked reading through some of the details again about Mario Puzo and his writing of the story, and then the Godfather and the things they included in that, and the things that weren't actual things that the families would do prior to the movie, but then they liked it so much that they have become actual things. I just like that idea as like the movie is inspiration of people trying to live up to the model of that was shown in this.
For sure. And you see that in even like other forms of pop culture, like music, like hip hop, rap, like obviously inspired, like, gosh, like Murder Inc. was Ja Rule, like had his own like musical group or whatever. I don't remember, but I do remember it was called Murder Inc., which is kind of named after like a real life mafia conglomerate. So yeah, you can really see it influence a lot of things.
Bryce, before we get to our roundtable questions, can you share with listeners what we'll be talking about on our next episode, which is coming out on May 20th?
Yeah, so the other week we got a teaser trailer for the new season of Kids in the Hall, which will be coming out on Amazon Prime on May 13th. So in the next episode, we're going to be taking a look back at the quirky Canadian sketch show, which originally started in 1988. We'll be sharing some of our favorite sketches, and of course, we'll be talking a little bit about the movie that came out in the late 90s. Join us as we reminisce about one of the funniest shows ever produced. So I'm looking forward to chatting some Kids in the Hall with you, Caroline.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing probably one of my favorite Christmas specials of all time.
All right, quick roundtable question time. As I mentioned at the top of the show, just last week, Paramount Plus released a series called The Offer, which is about the making of The Godfather. What other movie would you like to see the making of brought to life in a TV series? Camilla?
I was thinking about this. I think I've mentioned before, I love reading about movie making more than actually seeing movies. I will read about, I'll read about the making of a movie, of any movie. But yeah. And I'm like, I don't need to see the movie. It's like, I love process. I love reading about that. And I had recently finished, or maybe time has lost all meaning. So I want to say probably in the last year, I read Mike Nichols' A Life, the book about the director Mike Nichols. It was fantastic. He had like a really obviously interesting life, enough for a book. But his first, I believe, if I remember, his first film that he directed was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. That's the first film that he directed, which, I mean, can you believe that's your first film that you direct? And of course, like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor are such huge, stars and characters in their own right. And yeah, I think I'd want to watch that. And also like Mike Nichols' process, like of just the description of how he was as a director, reading how he brought people to their character and to bring out their character, and in every kind of moment and in touch with the emotion. So fascinating. I would love to see that, or just, I guess, a behind the scenes of just Mike Nichols, like his career, maybe not even just that movie, because it's very fascinating.
Nice. Caroline?
I want to see Titanic. I think that when it came out in the 90s, it was kind of this in-between period where there wasn't this like papered over perfect story thing happening. Like people knew the production was in trouble and it was over budget, and Leonardo DiCaprio was spending ages in water tanks and all of these things were happening, but it wasn't the current age where like people would be doing like TikToks and reels from set, So I think there is a lot of information that's still unknown about what went on during the filming of Titanic. So that's my vote. Bryce?
It's funny because when I came up with that question, that was the very first movie I thought of was Titanic. Because yeah, I remember reading about it, and it was like, this movie's gonna be a disaster. It's over budget. Oh my god! Like, wait till this thing like just tanks and it's over. Yeah, it's that would be my pick, but went in a different route. Also, a great movie from the 70s, and that's The Exorcist. Is my pick, because this is a movie where there's actually a lot of stuff you can go on YouTube and just kind of do a deep dive on the making of this movie. But this is a movie that people believed that this film was cursed, of course, that the devil had cursed this movie. There was a fire that destroyed pretty much the entire set. There were some mysterious deaths. And there was even an eventual, I don't know if he was a serial killer, but there was a killer that has a very minor role in the movie. Yeah. So it's this is a wild making of that if you go back and you do some reading on the making of The Exorcist, I think that would make it a really entertaining TV series. Caroline, Paramount Pictures calls you and says that I know, you're just waiting for that call. It says that they're remaking The Godfather and they need your help in casting. After you fail to talk them out of the remake, which actor are you making sure is getting a part in the new Godfather? Any role, any actor.
Adam Driver, with the caveat that I have not seen House of Gucci. So I cannot comment on that. But then I was thinking, weren't we going to cast him in our It's a Wonderful Life remake? I think his name came up in that conversation as well. So, yeah, I think he can do it all.
Who are you? Who's Adam Driver? Is he your Michael or is he your Sonny?
Yeah, I don't think he's Sonny, but he could be Sonny. But I think Michael.
Michael would be a good one. Camilla, how about you?
Well, in keeping with staying on the good side of the Italian-American League and wanting to keep Italian-Americans in the remake, and just to blow your mind in terms of time, Marlon Brando was 47 when he made Godfather. So I'm going to go with Leonardo DiCaprio, who is 47.
Oh my God.
As Vito Corleone. But I do think he would knock it out of the park. I mean, he's been in kind of some Scorsese movies, of course, The Departed and stuff. But I love Leonardo DiCaprio, great actor on screen, and great to just watch. So I think him as Vito Corleone would be, I think, a good fit.
He makes great movie choices, like, maybe does one film a year. But everything he does is just very interesting. And yeah, pretty much it's like, oh, the trailer for the new Leonardo DiCaprio movie is coming out. I'm like, I really don't care what it's about. He picks great movies. Like, you just know it's going to be a good movie essentially. So yeah, he's great. For me, I kind of cheated a little bit on this one. I thought this would be a great way to just kind of go full circle and have Robert De Niro as the old Vito Corleone. He plays the young one in Part Two. Let's just have him play Vito. He's played the role already. It's kind of cheating, but I think I think that would be acceptable.
Another, keeping it really in the family, Nicolas Cage, maybe,
Yes.
Coppola family member. I could see him chewing the scenery, obviously.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Camilla. I've had so much fun talking about The Godfather with you. Is there anything coming up that you would like our listeners to know about?
Nothing event-wise, but I did want to just promote, now with EPL, now we're having in-person programming again. But I just wanted to say, come visit the Stanley Milner Library. That's where I work now. I'm still amazed every time I go into work when I'm not sick. I get to see and just how beautiful the space is. And of course, now we have even more kind of features opening up, like the kitchen. Of course, the beautiful art on the wall. I'm just really looking forward to the summertime I'm sure there will be more events on Churchill Square. So yeah, please come, take a look at the wall, take a look at the art, just come and grab a coffee. There's a lot of great coffee shops opening up again downtown. Rosewood is close by. So yeah, grab a coffee, come and just wander and come and take a look at the space because it's so beautiful. So that's my pick of the week.
I also work out of that branch, and I'm up on the 5th floor. But I've been working from home, and I do come in, a few days a week, and it's always fun and rejuvenating for me anyway to be in that space. So if you haven't been down there yet, absolutely come down and check it out. You'll be amazed.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so, we encourage you to subscribe so that you get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and also tell a friend about the show. Maybe that friend who loves Mafia movies.
Yeah. Don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. As always, we would love to hear from you, our listeners, and you can reach us on Twitter at epl.ca and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds, or send us an email at podcast@epl.ca. Myself, Caroline, Camilla, all of the friends of the Overdue Finds family, they all receive those emails. So shoot us a note and let us know what you thought of this episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.